If a stranger ever calls you at 2 o'clock in the morning and tells you not to open your business the next day, believe her, because I did not, and it changed my life forever. Those words still echo in my mind every time I unlock the front door of my bakery before sunrise. At the time, I thought the call was nothing more than a cruel prank. Chicago was full of strange stories, anonymous threats, and people looking for attention. I had spent 6 years building Reed's Bakery from the ground up, working 16-hour days, learning every regular customer's favorite pastry, and believing that if I treated people with kindness, life would eventually return the favor. I was wrong about that. My phone rang at exactly 2 o'clock in the morning. Half asleep, I reached across the nightstand and answered without checking the number. A calm female voice spoke before I could say hello. "Do not open your bakery tomorrow morning. They already chose you." I sat upright immediately. "Who is this?" I asked. There was a brief silence before she answered. "My name is Vanessa, and you should not trust me." The line went dead. I stared at the dark screen, expecting another call that never came. I considered calling the police, but what would I tell them? That a stranger warned me about something she refused to explain? By the time dawn arrived, I had almost convinced myself to forget the conversation entirely. My bakery stood on a quiet neighborhood corner surrounded by bookstores, flower shops, and family-owned businesses that had survived decades of changing times. The familiar smell of fresh cinnamon rolls and warm sourdough usually settled my nerves, but that morning every sound seemed sharper than usual. I unlocked the front door at 6:30, switched on the lights, and glanced outside more often than I ever had before. Customers arrived as they always did. Mrs. Henderson ordered blueberry muffins for her grandchildren. Officer Ramirez picked up his usual black coffee and turkey breakfast sandwich before beginning his patrol. College students hurried inside looking for fresh bagels before class. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary, and I silently laughed at myself for allowing one mysterious phone call to disturb my sleep. Then I noticed something unusual. Across the street, a black luxury sedan remained parked in the same space for more than an hour. Its windows were heavily tinted, making it impossible to see who sat inside. Every time I looked toward it, an uneasy feeling settled in my chest. Shortly after noon, a courier entered carrying a large sealed envelope addressed to me. There was no return address, only my full name printed in neat black letters. Assuming it contained bakery supply paperwork, I thanked him and placed it behind the register until business slowed. When I finally opened it that afternoon, I found several official-looking financial documents stating that my bakery had agreed to guarantee a commercial loan worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The signatures looked exactly like mine. Every page carried my name, my business information, and a signature so convincing that even I struggled to believe it had been forged. My hands began to shake. I knew with complete certainty that I had never signed those papers. Before I could process what I was seeing, the small bell above the front door rang softly. I looked up and saw a tall woman step inside wearing a charcoal wool coat, dark leather gloves, and an expression so calm that the busy bakery suddenly felt strangely quiet. Her green eyes met mine for only a moment before she spoke with remarkable composure. "I told you not to open today." The woman closed the bakery door behind her with quiet confidence, shutting out the noise of the afternoon traffic without making the room feel smaller. She removed one leather glove, revealing a simple silver watch and steady hands that betrayed neither panic nor urgency. I recognized her voice immediately. She was the woman from the phone call. "You are Vanessa," I said, still holding the forged documents. She nodded once. "And unfortunately, you opened anyway." I folded the papers and crossed my arms, trying to hide how unsettled I felt. "You owe me an explanation." Her expression remained calm, almost apologetic. "Not here." I glanced around the bakery. A young couple laughed over slices of pie near the window, while an elderly man quietly read his newspaper in the corner. Everything looked perfectly normal, yet the warning in her voice made me notice details I had ignored before. The black sedan still sat across the street. A man wearing a gray jacket walked past my front window for the third time in less than 10 minutes without ever entering another store. Vanessa followed my gaze but did not turn her head. "Do not let them know you noticed." My pulse quickened. "Who are they?" She looked directly into my eyes. People who want you frightened enough to sign whatever they place in front of you next. Before I could ask another question, she reached into her coat and placed a folded receipt on the counter. At first glance it looked like an ordinary purchase receipt from a hardware store. When I unfolded it, I realized the back contained several handwritten notes listing dates, addresses, and business names from my neighborhood. 3 of the stores had already closed during the past year. 2 others belonged to friends I knew personally. My bakery was the 6th name on the list. "Where did you get this?" I whispered. "That answer would only place you in more danger today," Vanessa replied. "For now, you only need to know one thing. None of those business owners failed because they made bad decisions." A customer approached the register holding a box of cookies, and Vanessa stepped aside without another word. I completed the sale with a practiced smile, but my thoughts never left the receipt hidden beneath the cash drawer. By the time the customer left, Vanessa had ordered a plain black coffee and a blueberry muffin as though she were nothing more than another visitor enjoying a quiet afternoon. She paid in cash, thanked me politely, and chose a table near the front window where she could see both the street and the bakery entrance. For nearly an hour she barely touched her coffee. She simply watched the neighborhood with remarkable patience, while occasionally making brief notes inside a small leather notebook. I tried to focus on work, but every few minutes I caught myself looking toward her. There was nothing outwardly intimidating about her. She spoke softly when another customer asked whether the empty chair beside her was available. She smiled warmly at a little girl proudly carrying a cupcake with bright blue frosting. She even held the front door open for an elderly couple leaving the bakery. None of it matched the mysterious warning call or the strange confidence with which she had walked into my life. As closing time approached, the black sedan finally pulled away from the curb without ever stopping in front of another business. Vanessa finished the last sip of her coffee, stood, and walked back toward the counter. "Tomorrow morning someone will offer to help solve your paperwork problem," she said quietly. "Do not sign anything, no matter how convincing they sound." I frowned. How can you possibly know that? For the first time since we met, a shadow of sadness crossed her face. Because they follow the same pattern every time. She placed a small black ring engraved with an unfamiliar symbol on the countertop beside the register. "Keep this somewhere safe. If anything changes before I return, do not call the number on those documents. Call me instead." Before I could ask how to reach her, she slid a business card across the counter. It contained only a first name, a handwritten phone number, and nothing else. I barely slept that night. Vanessa's business card rested beside the strange black ring on my kitchen table, and every time I looked at them, I questioned whether I had made a mistake by believing even a single word she had said. Yet I could not ignore the forged documents or the list of neighborhood businesses that had mysteriously closed after facing similar financial trouble. By the following morning I unlocked the bakery with a knot in my stomach instead of the usual excitement that always came with the smell of fresh bread rising in the ovens. Outside, Chicago moved through another ordinary weekday. People hurried toward the train station carrying coffee cups, delivery trucks unloaded supplies along the street, and familiar customers waved as they passed my front window. Everything appeared completely normal until shortly after 9 o'clock, when a sharply dressed man entered carrying a leather briefcase and introduced himself as a financial consultant representing a lending company. He smiled politely and complimented the bakery before placing several neatly organized folders on the counter. "There appears to have been a misunderstanding regarding your recent loan agreement," he explained with practiced confidence. "Fortunately, we can resolve everything today if you simply sign a few updated documents." My heartbeat quickened. Vanessa had predicted this almost word for word. I forced myself to remain calm while pretending to review the paperwork. Every page looked official. Company logos, legal language, notarized stamps, and familiar signatures covered the documents. If I had not already known the first agreement was fraudulent, I might have believed every sentence. "I would like my attorney to review these first," I replied. His friendly smile barely changed, but something colder appeared behind his eyes. "That really is not necessary. Delaying could create additional financial consequences for your business." I remembered Vanessa's warning. Do not sign anything, no matter how convincing they sound. I slowly closed the folder and slid it back across the counter. "Then I will accept the delay." The man gathered his papers with careful precision before standing. I hope you do not regret making this more complicated than it needs to be. He left without raising his voice, yet the conversation unsettled me far more than if he had openly argued. Less than 5 minutes later my phone vibrated. The screen displayed only one name. Vanessa. You did not sign, did you? She asked immediately.
No, iyan suarat.
How did you know he was already here? There was a brief pause before she replied. Because they always move quickly once fear begins to fade. Before I could ask another question, she said she would arrive within 10 minutes. Exactly 9 minutes later, she walked through the bakery carrying nothing more than a paper bag from a nearby grocery store. To everyone else, she appeared to be an ordinary customer stopping by for breakfast. She ordered black coffee, thanked me politely, and waited until the morning rush became quieter before speaking again. May I see the copies they left behind? She asked softly. I handed her the documents, and she examined every page with remarkable attention. Finally, she stopped at one signature near the bottom of the final contract. There, she said, pointing toward a tiny flourish beneath the printed name. Your signature was copied from a business license renewal filed almost 4 years ago. I stared at the page in disbelief. How can you recognize something that specific? For the first time since we met, Vanessa hesitated before answering. Because I have spent years studying how they operate. She carefully folded the paperwork and returned it to me before adding one sentence that left me completely speechless. The person leading this operation believes you possess something far more valuable than your bakery, even though you do not know you have it yet. Vanessa's final sentence stayed with me long after she left the bakery that afternoon. The person leading this operation believes you possess something far more valuable than your bakery, even though you do not know you have it yet. I replayed those words repeatedly while wiping the display cases, serving customers, and locking the front door that evening. Nothing about my life seemed extraordinary. I had inherited a small bakery from my parents after years of saving every dollar I earned. I lived in a modest apartment above the shop. I rarely traveled farther than a few neighborhoods away. Whatever these strangers wanted, I could not imagine why they believed I possessed it. The following morning I arrived before sunrise as usual. The streets remained quiet except for delivery trucks and commuters beginning another workday. As I unlocked the back entrance, I noticed someone had slipped a plain white envelope beneath the door during the night. There was no stamp, no address, and no name written outside. Inside rested a single sheet of paper containing one sentence typed in neat black letters. Some family histories are worth more than fortunes. There was nothing else inside. No signature. No explanation. I immediately thought about calling Vanessa, but I hesitated. Part of me still questioned whether trusting a woman who appeared to know everything before it happened was the right decision. Instead, I searched through old storage boxes in the office behind the bakery, hoping I might discover something connected to my parents or the building itself. After nearly 2 hours, I found only faded photographs, old recipes, utility records, and business licenses dating back decades. Nothing explained the mysterious message. Shortly before lunchtime, Vanessa quietly entered the bakery carrying her usual black coffee order before I even asked. She seemed to notice my expression immediately. You found something, she said softly. I handed her the anonymous letter without speaking. She studied the page for several seconds before folding it carefully. They are becoming impatient, she said. Because I refused to sign? I asked. She nodded slightly. And because they expected you to become frightened enough to ask the wrong people for help. I crossed my arms. Then tell me the truth. Who are these people, and why do they keep following me? Vanessa looked toward the front windows, making certain no one stood nearby, before lowering her voice. There is a financial network operating behind several legitimate companies throughout the city. They quietly pressure struggling business owners into signing complicated agreements that eventually transfer valuable properties and records into private hands. Most people believe they simply made unfortunate business decisions. I frowned. And you know all this because? For the first time, she answered without avoiding the question. Because I have spent years trying to stop them. Her response surprised me more than anything else she had said. She did not describe herself as a police officer, investigator, or attorney. She simply spoke with quiet certainty, as though carrying a responsibility she never asked for. Before I could respond, an elderly customer entered the bakery. Vanessa greeted him warmly by name, helped him carry his purchases to a nearby table, and returned with the same calm composure she always seemed to possess. Watching her interact so naturally with people around her made it increasingly difficult to reconcile the mysterious woman who anticipated danger with the thoughtful customer, who quietly held doors open and remembered everyone's favorite coffee. As the afternoon sunlight stretched across the bakery floor, Vanessa reached into her coat pocket and placed a small brass key beside the black ring she had given me earlier. "This belonged to your father," she said. My breath caught. How could you possibly have something that belonged to him? She met my eyes with unusual seriousness before answering. "Because your father trusted someone he believed could protect it until the right moment arrived. And I think that moment has finally come." The small brass key rested in my palm long after Vanessa left the bakery that afternoon. It looked ordinary at first glance, worn smooth by time, with a tiny engraved letter near the handle that matched the first letter of my family name. My father had passed away nearly 8 years earlier, and until that moment I had believed there were no secrets left for me to discover about him. He had been a hard-working baker, the kind of man who measured success by loyal customers instead of bank accounts. The idea that he had trusted Vanessa with something important felt almost impossible to accept. That evening dark clouds gathered over Chicago much faster than the weather forecast had predicted. By sunset heavy snow covered the sidewalks, and city officials began warning residents to avoid unnecessary travel. The neighborhood emptied earlier than usual as customers hurried home before the storm intensified. I planned to close the bakery early, but just as I switched the sign to close, the lights flickered twice before the entire block lost power. Emergency lights activated inside the bakery, casting everything in a warm amber glow. Only a few minutes later someone knocked gently on the front door. I looked outside and found Vanessa standing beneath the falling snow, her charcoal coat dusted white and her scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. When I unlocked the door, freezing wind rushed inside with her. "The roads are closing," she said quietly. "My car cannot make it across the river until morning." I hesitated only briefly before locking the door again behind her. "Then I guess neither of us is going anywhere tonight." We moved through the darkened bakery together, lighting several battery lanterns I kept for emergencies. Without the usual noise of refrigerators and ovens, the building felt strangely peaceful. I brewed coffee using a small gas burner, while Vanessa helped cover the display cases to protect the pastries from the cooling air. She worked naturally, as though helping in the bakery required no explanation. At one point she noticed the old wooden step stool wobbling beneath me while I reached for extra blankets stored above the pantry. Without saying a word, she steadied the ladder with one hand until I climbed down safely. The gesture was so simple that it caught me off guard. She never mentioned it afterward, and somehow that made it feel even more genuine. We eventually sat near the front windows wrapped in blankets, drinking hot coffee while thick snowflakes drifted silently past the glass. For the first time since we met, the conversation moved beyond mysterious warnings and forged paperwork. I asked whether she always preferred black coffee. She smiled faintly. My mother believed adding sugar only distracted people from appreciating good coffee. I laughed softly. My father believed the opposite. He insisted every difficult day deserved an extra cinnamon roll. The memory made us both smile. After a comfortable silence, Vanessa looked toward the falling snow. "Your father was a good man." I turned toward her immediately. "You knew him?" She nodded slowly. "Long before you inherited this bakery." I waited, hoping she would continue, but she remained quiet for several moments before speaking again. "There are parts of his story that belong to you. I have simply been waiting until it was safe enough to tell you." Outside, the snow continued falling, covering the streets in perfect white silence. Inside the warm glow of the lanterns, I realized something had quietly changed between us. I no longer saw Vanessa only as the mysterious woman who always seemed to know danger before it arrived. I saw someone carrying a burden she had never wanted, someone who protected strangers without asking for recognition, and someone who looked unexpectedly lonely despite her calm confidence. As midnight approached, she reached into her coat pocket and carefully placed an old folded photograph beside the brass key. "When morning comes," she said softly, I think you are finally ready to know why your father trusted me. Morning arrived wrapped in brilliant white silence after the storm finally passed. Sunlight reflected off fresh snow covering every rooftop and sidewalk outside the bakery, making the neighborhood appear almost untouched by the uncertainty that had settled into my life. I stood beside the front window holding the faded photograph Vanessa had left on the table the night before. The edges were worn, but the faces remained clear. My father stood beside a younger Vanessa, both smiling in front of my bakery years before I had taken over the business. They looked comfortable together, almost like old friends. I turned the photograph over and found a handwritten date from nearly 15 years earlier along with 4 simple words written in my father's familiar handwriting. Keep your promise, Vanessa. I looked toward her as she quietly finished washing 2 coffee mugs in the bakery sink. You knew him far better than you admitted, I said softly. She dried her hands before walking over to the table. Your father gave me something I had almost forgotten existed, she replied. A reason to believe that protecting people could matter more than controlling them. I listened without interrupting. She took a slow breath before continuing. Years ago, I was surrounded by people who measured success through influence and fear. Your father never judged me for the life I came from. Instead, he reminded me that every decision offered another chance to become someone different. Her voice remained calm, but I noticed genuine emotion behind every word. When he realized certain businesses in this neighborhood were being quietly targeted through fraudulent financial schemes, he began collecting records that could expose the people responsible. He never intended to become part of their world. He simply refused to ignore what he discovered. I looked down at the brass key still resting beside the photograph. Is that what this opens? Vanessa nodded. I believe so. He never told me where the lock was. Only that one day you would understand when the time came. Before I could ask another question, the bakery door opened and several regular customers entered, grateful the storm had passed. Vanessa immediately stepped aside, allowing me to return to work without interruption. What surprised me most was how naturally she blended into the morning routine. She greeted Mrs. Henderson by name, carried a tray for an elderly customer whose hands trembled slightly, and quietly paid for a young construction worker's breakfast after overhearing that he had forgotten his wallet. None of those people recognized her as anyone unusual. They simply thanked a polite stranger for her kindness. Watching those small moments unsettled me in an entirely different way. The mysterious woman who seemed connected to hidden financial networks also noticed when an elderly customer needed help carrying coffee to a table. That contradiction refused to leave my thoughts. Later that afternoon, after the bakery had grown quiet again, I locked the office door while Vanessa examined several old filing cabinets that had belonged to my father. Hidden behind decades of tax records and supplier invoices, we discovered a small wooden compartment built into the back of the lowest drawer. The brass key slid into the lock as though it had been waiting there all along. Inside rested a weathered leather notebook tied with faded blue ribbon. My hands trembled as I untied it. The first page contained my father's handwriting. Beneath a simple greeting addressed to me, one sentence immediately drew both of our attention. If you are reading this beside Vanessa, then she kept the promise I trusted her to keep, and the truth has finally found its way home. My father had always believed that the truth should arrive at the right moment instead of the earliest one. As I read the first pages of his notebook, I finally understood what he meant. His handwriting remained as steady as I remembered from childhood, every sentence written with the same quiet patience. He had shown while teaching me how to knead bread dough or decorate birthday cakes. He explained that years before his death, several small businesses throughout our neighborhood had begun disappearing under circumstances that looked perfectly legal from the outside. Owners signed complicated financial agreements believing they were saving their companies, only to lose everything months later through carefully planned loopholes. My father became suspicious after noticing identical language, hidden inside contracts belonging to different shop owners. Instead of confronting anyone directly, he quietly began collecting copies of documents, payment records, and handwritten notes that revealed a pattern too consistent to be coincidence. As I turned another page, I discovered something even more surprising. My father wrote that he had never worked alone. A woman named Vanessa had approached him after noticing the same suspicious activity from an entirely different perspective. She possessed access to information that honest business owners could never obtain, while he understood the trust shared within the local community. Together they quietly documented enough evidence to expose the financial network responsible, but before they could complete everything, my father realized the people behind the operation had begun watching him. That was when he separated the evidence, hiding the most important records somewhere only I could eventually find. I lowered the notebook and looked across the office toward Vanessa. She stood silently beside the filing cabinet, giving me space to process everything before speaking. "He never told me where the remaining records were hidden," she said gently. "Only that he trusted you to discover them when you were ready." I searched her face, remembering every mysterious warning she had given me since the first phone call. None of it felt random anymore. She had not appeared in my life by accident. She had been honoring a promise for years. Before I could respond, my attention shifted to the inside cover of the notebook where something small had been tucked beneath the leather binding. I carefully removed it and unfolded a faded newspaper clipping. The article reported on a woman identified by investigators as the leader of an organized criminal enterprise operating throughout Chicago. Beneath the headline was a photograph I recognized immediately. Vanessa. My heart seemed to stop. I looked from the newspaper to the woman standing only a few feet away. She did not deny it. She did not even appear surprised that I had found it. Instead, she quietly met my eyes with a calm expression that carried both regret and acceptance. "You deserve the complete truth," she said softly. "Yes, that photograph is real. Years ago I inherited leadership of an organization I never wanted after members of my family disappeared from public life. Walking away would have allowed people far more ruthless than I was to take control. So I stayed not because I admired that world, but because I believed I could slowly dismantle it from within while protecting innocent people whenever I could." I stared at her, unable to reconcile the woman who quietly bought breakfast for strangers with the face printed beneath that headline. Every conversation we had shared suddenly seemed suspended between two completely different realities. She reached toward the notebook but stopped before touching it. "I never asked you to trust me," she whispered. "I only asked you not to trust the people who wanted to use you." I looked back at my father's final paragraph on the open page. Beneath everything else he had written, one sentence stood alone in darker ink, almost as though he wanted me to read it last. "When the day comes that you learn who Vanessa truly is, judge her by the choices she makes beside you, not by the stories others tell about her." My father's final sentence refused to leave my thoughts even after I closed the notebook. Judge her by the choices she makes beside you, not by the stories others tell about her. I wanted to believe him more than anyone, yet the newspaper clipping remained impossible to ignore. For years I had read headlines describing Vanessa as a powerful figure connected to one of Chicago's most mysterious criminal organizations. Now she stood quietly inside my office, looking less like the woman from those stories and more like someone exhausted from carrying secrets she never wanted. I slowly folded the newspaper and placed it back inside the notebook. "Why did you never tell me?" I asked. Vanessa lowered her eyes for a moment before answering. "Because if I had introduced myself with that truth on the first day, you never would have listened to anything else I said." I could not argue with her. She was right. If she had walked into my bakery and announced who she was, I would have called the police before hearing another word. The silence between us lasted several long seconds before I finally spoke again. "Then tell me everything now." Vanessa nodded. "I inherited that organization after my uncle died unexpectedly. Walking away would have handed control to people who viewed honest business owners as opportunities instead of neighbors. I stayed because I believed I could quietly protect more people from inside than I ever could from outside." She reached into her coat and removed a thin folder. Inside were photographs of neighborhood businesses, financial records, handwritten notes, and newspaper articles connected by careful annotations. Every page documented the same pattern my father had described in his journal. Companies appeared legitimate until they quietly pressured struggling owners into signing contracts that eventually transferred valuable properties into hidden corporations. "Most people believe I run those operations," Vanessa said softly. "The truth is that I have spent years disrupting them without exposing the people helping me." I looked through the documents, recognizing several businesses only a few blocks from my bakery. Some had already closed. Others still struggled to survive. Everything suddenly felt painfully real. Why is my bakery important? I asked. Vanessa hesitated before answering. Because your father discovered the financial records connecting every transaction. Before he passed away, he separated the evidence into several locations. Whoever controls those records can expose the entire network or destroy it forever. I looked around my small office, wondering whether the answers had been hidden nearby all along. And they believe I know where everything is. Vanessa nodded. Exactly. Before either of us spoke again, someone knocked gently on the bakery door. Through the front window I recognized Mrs. Alvarez, who owned the neighborhood flower shop. She looked worried. I unlocked the door, and she hurried inside carrying several unopened envelopes. These arrived this morning, she said quietly. The same company that contacted you is now contacting me. Vanessa accepted one envelope and carefully examined the paperwork without opening it completely. Her expression remained calm, but I noticed the concern in her eyes deepen. The timeline has changed, she said almost to herself. They are expanding faster than expected. Mrs. Alvarez looked between us with confusion. Do either of you know what is happening? Vanessa answered with gentle reassurance. Not everything yet, but we are going to make sure nobody faces this alone. Watching her comfort a frightened neighbor without hesitation reminded me once again that actions often revealed more about a person than rumors ever could. As Mrs. Alvarez prepared to leave, a small folded note slipped from one of the envelopes onto the bakery floor. I picked it up and unfolded it. Only one sentence had been typed across the center of the page. The notebook is only the beginning. Find the ledger before she does. The note felt heavier than the single sheet of paper should have. Find the ledger before she does. I read the sentence 3 times before looking up at Vanessa. She remained unusually quiet, studying the typed message as though she recognized far more than the words themselves. You know what this means, I said. She nodded slowly. Yes. They finally realized your father separated the evidence instead of keeping everything in one place. Mrs. Alvarez looked from one of us to the other, clearly overwhelmed. Vanessa gently reassured her that she should ignore any pressure to sign new financial documents and promised someone would discreetly review every paper she received. After our neighbor left, the bakery fell silent again except for the familiar hum of the refrigerators. I locked the front door even though it was still business hours. For the first time since all of this had begun, protecting my customers seemed more important than making another sale. Vanessa placed my father's notebook beside the mysterious note and carefully compared the typeface with several old documents stored inside the folder she carried. The wording is different, she murmured. The people sending these messages are becoming impatient. They rarely reveal what they are actually searching for. I looked toward the notebook. What exactly is this ledger? She rested both hands on the counter before answering. Your father once described it as the missing piece. The notebook explains the pattern. The ledger proves who benefited from every fraudulent transaction. My heartbeat quickened. Names. Names, dates, property transfers, financial routes, and every company connected to them, she replied. Enough evidence to expose people who have spent years hiding behind respectable public identities. I opened the notebook again, hoping I had overlooked something. As I carefully turned each page, I noticed several recipe cards tucked between the handwritten entries. At first they appeared completely ordinary, filled with measurements for bread, pies, and pastries that my father had made for decades. Then one detail caught my attention. Certain ingredient amounts had tiny circles drawn beside them while others did not. I remembered my father teaching me that he always wrote recipes the same way, never marking random numbers. Vanessa, I whispered, sliding one card toward her. Does this look strange to you? She examined the recipe for only a few seconds before a faint smile crossed her face. Your father was clever. She pointed toward the circled measurements. These are not baking notes. They are reference markers. We compared every recipe card inside the notebook and quickly discovered the same pattern repeating. The circled numbers matched page numbers and paragraph lines elsewhere in the journal. Together they revealed a hidden message my father had scattered throughout seemingly ordinary recipes. The final decoded sentence read, The ledger rests where every morning begins. I looked around the bakery confused. Every morning for my father had begun before sunrise with flour, coffee, and fresh bread. That could mean almost anything, I admitted. Vanessa slowly walked across the bakery, studying every familiar corner with thoughtful attention. She stopped beside the old wall clock hanging above the coffee station, the one my father had repaired countless times instead of replacing. When I knew him, she said quietly, he always poured his first cup of coffee before touching the ovens. He called this corner the beginning of every day. She reached toward the wooden shelf beneath the clock and gently pressed against its underside. A small hidden panel shifted open with a soft click neither of us had ever noticed before. Inside rested a weathered metal box wrapped carefully in waxed cloth. My breath caught as I lifted it into the light. The lock had already been opened years earlier. Inside lay a thick leather-bound ledger exactly as the note had described. Resting on top of it was one sealed envelope addressed in my father's handwriting. It contained only 6 words. Trust her, but trust yourself more. The leather ledger felt surprisingly heavy in my hands, not because of its size, but because I finally understood why so many strangers had suddenly entered my life. My father had hidden more than records. He had hidden the truth that powerful people had spent years trying to erase. I carefully opened the first page while Vanessa stood beside me without attempting to touch it. The entries were remarkably organized. Every business name appeared beside dates, property transfers, corporate registrations, and handwritten notes explaining how each owner had been pressured into signing documents they barely understood. Several names belonged to people I knew personally. Others belonged to companies that still operated successfully throughout Chicago under spotless public reputations. The deeper I read, the more obvious the pattern became. Everything connected to the same network my father had quietly investigated years before. Then I reached the final section. Instead of financial records, my father had written a personal message addressed only to me. He explained that if I had reached this page, it meant Vanessa had honored the promise she made long ago. He also revealed something I never expected. Vanessa did not enter your life because of the ledger, he wrote. She entered your life because I asked her to watch over you if I could no longer do it myself. I lowered the page slowly, struggling to process those words. You promised him, I whispered. Vanessa nodded. The day your father realized people were following him, he asked only one thing of me. He wanted someone to make sure you had the chance to choose your own future, instead of having it stolen. I closed the ledger and looked directly at her. Then why did you wait until now? A quiet sadness crossed her face. Because as long as nobody searched for the ledger, bringing me into your life would only have placed you in greater danger. Everything changed when those forged contracts appeared. I wanted to believe every word she spoke. Part of me already did. Yet another part remembered the newspaper photograph, the years she had spent leading an organization hidden from ordinary people, and the countless questions she still had not answered. My father's final note echoed inside my mind. Trust her, but trust yourself more. I took a slow breath before speaking. If all of this is true, then we should bring the ledger directly to federal investigators today. Vanessa did not argue. Instead, she surprised me with a simple nod. That is exactly what I hoped you would say. Her immediate agreement caught me completely off guard. I had expected resistance, hesitation, or another carefully guarded explanation. Instead, she looked almost relieved. You are not trying to keep it? I asked. No, she replied quietly. The purpose of protecting evidence is to eventually place it where it belongs, not to possess it forever. Before either of us could discuss our next step, my phone rang. The caller identification displayed an unfamiliar number. I answered cautiously. A calm female voice introduced herself as an investigative attorney working with a federal financial crimes task force. She explained that someone had anonymously submitted documents indicating my bakery might become the next target in an ongoing fraud investigation. She asked whether we could meet that afternoon. After I ended the call, Vanessa smiled faintly. Your father planned further ahead than either of us realized. I frowned. What do you mean? She pointed toward the final page of the ledger where a sealed envelope remained tucked inside a hidden pocket. I opened it carefully and unfolded a single handwritten sheet. At the bottom appeared my father's unmistakable signature. Above it, One final instruction had been written in larger letters than everything else. When the right people finally come asking questions, let Madison answer them first. My father's final instruction settled every doubt still fighting inside me. He had trusted me to speak first, not because I possessed special knowledge, but because he believed the truth should come from someone with nothing to gain by telling it. That afternoon I carefully placed the ledger, the notebook, the recipe cards, and every supporting document inside a plain canvas bag before leaving the bakery with Vanessa. The city had returned to its usual rhythm after the snowstorm, yet I noticed details I had ignored for years. Every small family business represented someone's dream, someone's sacrifice, and someone who believed honesty would be enough to succeed. My father had spent his final years protecting those people in silence. I finally understood why. We arrived at a modest federal office instead of the imposing downtown building I had expected. The investigative attorney introduced herself as Claire Morgan and greeted us with calm professionalism, rather than suspicion. She listened carefully as I explained everything from the anonymous phone call to the forged contracts, the hidden notebook, the brass key, and the discovery of the ledger. Vanessa remained silent through nearly the entire conversation, allowing me to tell the story exactly as my father had instructed. When I finished, Claire slowly opened the ledger and began reviewing the records. Every few pages she exchanged quiet glances with another investigator seated across the table. Neither interrupted me until nearly an hour had passed. Finally Claire closed the ledger and looked directly at Vanessa. Most of these names have appeared separately in different investigations over several years, she said. This is the first time we have seen the complete financial structure connected in one place. Vanessa nodded calmly. That was always Richard Reed's goal. Hearing my father's full name spoken aloud inside that room made everything feel unexpectedly personal. Claire then asked the question I had quietly anticipated. Why protect this information for so many years instead of bringing it forward sooner? Vanessa answered without hesitation. Because incomplete evidence would only have warned the people responsible. Richard believed waiting until every connection could be documented would protect more innocent business owners in the long run. The room fell silent. No one challenged her explanation. Instead, Claire carefully gathered the documents before looking back at me. Your father demonstrated remarkable patience, she said. Without these records, many of these transactions would likely have remained impossible to connect. Relief slowly replaced weeks of constant anxiety. For the first time since the mysterious phone call, I felt as though the weight resting on my shoulders had begun to lift. As the meeting concluded, Claire thanked both of us and explained that the investigation would proceed carefully to protect local business owners, while verifying every record. She assured us that additional interviews might be necessary, but emphasized that the evidence itself would now be preserved through official legal channels. Outside the building, cold afternoon air greeted us as we walked toward the sidewalk. Neither of us spoke immediately. Finally I turned toward Vanessa. You could have taken credit for protecting all of this. She smiled gently and shook her head. None of this was ever about receiving credit. It was about keeping a promise. I looked at her differently than I ever had before. The mysterious stranger who had once frightened me with a 2 o'clock morning phone call now stood beside me with nothing left to hide. Before I could thank her, her phone vibrated softly. She glanced at the screen, and for the first time since we had met, genuine surprise crossed her face. She handed the phone to me without saying a word. The message contained only one sentence from an unknown sender. The network is finished, but the person who created it has finally decided to step into the light. The message remained on the screen as though it had been waiting years for the right moment to appear. The network is finished, but the person who created it has finally decided to step into the light. Vanessa read the sentence one more time before quietly placing her phone in her coat pocket. There was no fear in her expression, only the calm acceptance of someone who had expected this day to arrive eventually. During the drive back to the bakery, neither of us spoke very much. The silence no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt honest. For the first time since we met, there were almost no secrets standing between us. The following morning, news reports began mentioning that several financial investigations involving commercial property transfers had entered a new phase. No names were released, But local business owners throughout our neighborhood quietly started sharing stories they had kept to themselves for years. One florist admitted she had nearly signed away her shop before changing her mind at the last minute. A bookstore owner revealed that confusing legal paperwork had almost forced him to close permanently. Listening to their stories made me realize how many people had come dangerously close to losing everything without ever understanding why. Later that afternoon, Claire Morgan called with an update. She explained that the evidence from my father's ledger had already helped investigators verify multiple independent records. More importantly, someone with direct knowledge of the financial network had voluntarily agreed to cooperate with the investigation. After I ended the call, I looked toward Vanessa. She quietly nodded before I even asked the question. "You already knew," I said. "Yes," she answered softly. "Some people eventually grow tired of protecting lies." She reached into her handbag and removed a neatly organized folder. "There is something else I need to do before all of this is truly over." Inside the folder were legal documents transferring ownership interests, financial holdings, and several business entities connected to her organization into independent trustees who would dissolve every remaining operation through lawful procedures. I looked at her with surprise. "You are giving everything up." She smiled gently. "Most of it stopped meaning anything to me years ago. I only held on to it long enough to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands." Watching her sign each document without hesitation made me understand something my father had recognized long before I ever met her. Redemption was never about pretending the past had not happened. It was about making different choices when the opportunity finally arrived. Over the next several days, Vanessa quietly met with attorneys, accountants, and investigators. She never asked for recognition, never appeared before cameras, and never attempted to reshape public opinion about herself. She simply completed every responsibility she believed she still owed. Meanwhile, life slowly returned to my bakery. Regular customers filled the tables once again. Children laughed over oversized cookies after school. Mrs. Henderson resumed bringing blueberry muffins home every Friday for her grandchildren. The neighborhood seemed lighter somehow, as though people sensed that an invisible weight had finally begun lifting. One evening after closing, Vanessa helped me wipe down the last table before switching off the lights. We stood together near the front window watching snow melt from the sidewalks beneath the warm glow of the streetlights. "Your father believed this place would always become more than a bakery," she said quietly. "He believed it would remind people that communities survive when neighbors protect one another." I smiled, thinking about everything he had left behind for both of us. Before leaving, Vanessa placed the old black ring on the counter beside the register. "I do not need this anymore," she said. I looked at the unfamiliar symbol engraved into its surface one final time before sliding it back toward her. "Keep it," I replied. "Not as a reminder of who you were, but as proof of who you chose to become." For the first time since that unexpected phone call changed my life, Vanessa smiled without even the smallest trace of sadness. 1 year later, I still arrived at the bakery before sunrise, just as my father had taught me. The difference was that I no longer unlocked the front door carrying fear. I unlocked it carrying gratitude. The neighborhood looked healthier than it had in years. Empty storefronts had become family businesses once again. Fresh flowers filled the display outside Mrs. Alvarez's shop every morning. The bookstore hosted weekend reading events for children, and neighbors who had once worried about losing everything now greeted one another with genuine optimism. Life had quietly returned to the ordinary rhythm I had once taken for granted. The investigations eventually reached their conclusion through patient legal work supported by the evidence my father had preserved so carefully. Many fraudulent property agreements were overturned, while honest business owners finally recovered records they believed had been lost forever. Claire Morgan occasionally stopped by the bakery for coffee, always reminding me that one person's decision to protect the truth had changed far more lives than anyone first realized. She never referred to my father as a hero because she knew he would have disliked the word. Instead, she simply called him a good neighbor, and somehow that description meant even more. Vanessa chose a different future than the one the world had expected for her. After completing every legal obligation connected to her former organization, she quietly disappeared from newspaper headlines and public speculation. Rather than pursuing influence or recognition, she invested her time helping neighborhood businesses strengthen financial protections, so that no family would ever face the same hidden traps again. She refused interviews, declined awards, and never corrected strangers who continued believing outdated stories about her. She once told me that peace became much easier to recognize after spending years surrounded by noise. I finally understood what she meant. We never rushed the relationship that slowly grew between us. Trust had taken time to build, and we respected that process. It appeared in ordinary moments instead of dramatic declarations. She remembered exactly how I preferred my morning coffee. I learned she always paused outside the bakery for a few seconds before coming inside, because she enjoyed watching the lights appear through the front windows. We cooked dinner together after long workdays, laughed over recipes my father had left behind, and discovered that the safest place either of us had ever known was simply sharing everyday life without secrets. One quiet autumn afternoon, while reorganizing the office, I found the black ring resting inside the same drawer where I had placed it months earlier. I held it for a long moment before walking into the bakery. Vanessa looked up from helping a customer choose pastries and smiled the same calm smile that had once seemed impossible for me to trust. After the customer left, I placed the ring in her hand. "I think it belongs in the past now," I said. She looked at it thoughtfully before closing the drawer instead of putting it on. "Then let it stay there," she replied. "A reminder, not a destination." As we prepared to close for the evening, I noticed one final envelope tucked beneath the old coffee station where the hidden compartment had once concealed my father's ledger. My heart skipped until I recognized the familiar handwriting immediately. It was the last note he had ever written, one I had somehow overlooked. I unfolded the page carefully. "If you are smiling while reading this," he had written, "then you discovered something far more valuable than any ledger I could leave behind. The greatest inheritance is never money or property. It is finding people who help you become your truest self. Protect that gift every single day." I looked across the bakery at Vanessa as warm afternoon sunlight filled the room through the front windows. She met my eyes, smiled without needing to ask what the letter said, and quietly reached for my hand. In that peaceful moment, I realized the mysterious phone call that had once sounded like the beginning of my greatest fear had quietly become the first sentence of the happiest chapter of my life.